And today marks World Refugee Day. It's marked on the 20th of June every year. And this is a day designated by the United Nations to honor refugees around the globe. It also looks at the strength and the courage of people who have been forced to flee their home countries, whether they're escaping, in fact, conflict or persecution. And this is, of course, due to some ongoing conflict in various parts of the world. We're seeing more and more people being displaced when you look at what is happening around the globe. And just to look at some of these statistics, you're seeing that 79.5 million forcibly displaced. This is according to the UNHRC, and about 1% of the world's population is displaced, and about 50% of the world's refugees are children. Certainly worrying there, because UNICEF talks about how this continues to have an impact on children when it comes to schooling, even things such as access to basic sanitation. You look at developing countries hosting around 85% of the world's refugees. 80% of Syrian refugee families live below the poverty line. And this also continues to really become an area of concern, because not only is the issue of poverty one that is top of mind, there's also the issue of safety that also continues, and even access to some of the basic facilities. You look at 25% internally displaced are young women. Pregnant women, around 4%. This is according to Relief Web, and this also raises issues around the access to healthcare. One person, for example, forcibly displaced approximately every 2 seconds. You can only imagine, with more and more conflict around the region, around the world, how many people have now been displaced. May 2020, 2.2 million asylum seekers from South Sudan alone. So you can see just how bad the situation is. You look at issues around menstrual hygiene, for example, when it comes to the basic needs that some of these young girls are battling. They don't even have access to a toilet in some of these areas where they are fleeing to. So certainly it makes some of these issues quite difficult when it comes to really being able to settle in some of the areas where they are fleeing, or whether they're fleeing persecution or they're fleeing from conflict-ridden countries. So let's stay with this particular subject and look at, this World Refugee Day, whether or not it is really having the desired impact, and look at it in greater detail with Dr. Djibril Diallo, who's African Renaissance and Diaspora Network President and CEO. Thank you so much to you. It's World Refugee Day. A lot of people are talking about it, but would you say that the plight of millions of people who are displaced often goes unnoticed, or is not even top of mind for some governments globally?
Today is a very important day because refugees are individuals who are obliged to leave their countries under fear of persecution. Very important. We're in a continent, Africa, where welcoming the stranger, welcoming the other, is part of deeply rooted tradition of any African nation.
All right, Doc, I'm going to ask that they try to re-establish a better line with you there as we talk about the importance of governments when it comes to balancing the inequalities as well as protecting some of those who are fleeing into their countries. Doc, I do understand that you're back and you were talking about the importance of welcoming visitors. You were taking us through that.
Yes, I was taking you through the fact that Africa has always been the most welcoming continent in today's world. Therefore, welcoming refugees has always been part of African traditions.
And Doc, how then, in a time like where we are now, let's talk about Africa, and even zooming it back to South Africa, there's a growing despondency around inequality. And some are saying that they're not even getting access to basic services. At the same time, the governments need to protect some of those who are fleeing into our country. How do they begin to address these concerns?
things. One, South Africa, like any other country, is undergoing very serious pressure on its own combined impact of COVID-19 and the war on Ukraine. So that the South African population itself is suffering from those dire conditions. At the same time, governments have the responsibility to protect those nationals to be protected because of well-founded fear of persecution. So that you have, on the one hand, the pressures on the land, the pressure on housing, the pressure on employment, which the local population is feeling, and who better to take it out onto than refugees in general. But at the same time, the countries are on the responsibility to protect them, because after all, South Africa is a great nation, a great welcoming nation, which was founded, which was liberated on the solidarity of the international community. Therefore, this is something that South Africa will always remember.
Now, one of the things that we see when it comes to refugees is the growing concern around the safety of women. They are at risk when it comes to gender-based violence, and it really is a risk generally for a woman in their own home. But would you say this risk increases as, you know, more and more women are becoming displaced?
The risk is heightened for women who are among the vulnerable populations. The other vulnerable populations are children and the aged. The pressure on women is even greater. That is why at the African Renaissance and Diaspora, we launched a major campaign to use the convening power of sports and culture to give a red card to all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls. This is very, very important. The women are to be protected, not only in terms of situations of refugees, but also in terms of situations in their own individual countries.
And you talk about that red card. Does it form part of the proactive, you know, measures to be able to get more and more women to come forward and talk about some of these incidents?
Very much so, because in the game of football, a red card signifies a very serious infringement of the law. And when a player gets a red card, that player is thrown, their offense against women and girls is thrown off the field using the convening powers of sports and culture as entry points.
All right, Doc, your line letting us down there several times, but I do hope you can come to studio and we can have this conversation sometime, because this is an important conversation. That is Dr. Djibril Diallo, African Renaissance and Diaspora Network President and CEO. We do apologize for the poor connection there.